Good evening. On behalf of the Aurora University community, welcome and thank you for joining us and sharing in this commemoration of the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. My name is Ted Parkey. I have the pleasure of serving as Executive Vice President here at AU and also as Director of the Center for Faith and Action on campus. We're delighted to have you with us. It's also my pleasure, and I'd like to extend a special invitation and welcome on behalf of President Rebecca Sherrick and offer her regrets that she was not able to be with us tonight as she's following her doctor's orders and recommendations of getting some time away and from some lingering effects of a recent accident. She's doing fine and has been in the office a little bit and has been really encouraged to take some time away from her accident, but she's doing great in the last few days. So on behalf of all of us, again, welcome. Dr. King challenged us many years ago to set lofty goals and have lofty goals of creating a beloved community, and reminded us that this will require a qualitative change in our souls as well as a quantitative change in our lives. We're very fortunate here at AU and in our community to have government leaders and partners throughout the community committed to Dr. King's goal of creating a beloved community. It's my pleasure at this time to introduce one of those partners, an individual who has been a stalwart advocate on this ongoing journey of creating community here at Aurora. Please join me in welcoming a true champion for the city of Aurora and our university here at AU. Please join me in welcoming Mayor Tom Weiss.
Thank you, Ted. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I want to welcome all of you, citizens, dignitaries, one and all, to be here with us tonight. And as I make this introduction, I'm reminded of how often Dr. King talked about service. And I think the gentleman I'm about to introduce is certainly a brilliant example of service to the community in line with what Dr. King talked about so often. Congressman Bill Foster, as you may know, is both a scientist and a businessman. Well before he entered the field of politics, he had distinguished himself beginning at the age of 19 by creating a company that produced stage lighting and now produces about half the stage lighting that's produced or bought or purchased in this whole country. He also worked at Fermilab and was part of the team that discovered the quark, which is the heaviest form of matter. So he's distinguished himself in those areas. And now with 3+ terms in Congress has done so there as well. And I'm very, reassured by the fact that we have a congressman from this area. When we look at all the technological challenges that we face as a society and as a country, as has been in the news just in recent weeks, it's comforting to me to know that we have someone who has a grasp of the issues at hand and can be part of the solution as this country moves forward. So if you would, join me in welcoming Congressman Bill Foster. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you all for inviting me to speak here tonight. I want to thank Mayor Weissner for the kind introduction, and as well as Executive Vice President Ted Parkey, and everyone at Aurora University for putting on this event tonight, commemorating the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'd also like to thank Senator Raoul for joining us this evening and for his work as a dedicated public servant. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Bill Foster. I'm a scientist and businessman, and I'm proud to represent this area as part of the 11th Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives. This year, we have celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, one of the most important pieces of legislation ever enacted in this country, a law that is also very important to me personally. My father was a civil rights lawyer who wrote much of the enforcement language behind the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This act was one of the greatest achievements in civil rights and human rights in our nation's history. Like me, my father was trained as a scientist, and during World War II, he designed fire control computers for the Navy. And most of the way through the war, he started getting these reports of how many people had been killed this week by his team's equipment. And despite his knowledge of and understanding of the justice of that war, he became deeply unhappy with the idea of his technical skills being used to kill people. And so when he came back from the war, he thought about it for a while, and he decided that he wanted to spend part of his life in service to his fellow man. This was the late 1940s and 1950s, at the birth of the civil rights movement. My father had grown up in the South, where he saw firsthand the struggles for equality and for basic human rights. And he saw civil rights as the great cause of his generation. So he left behind his career in science and became a civil rights lawyer. My father, among other things, wrote the federal regulations for implementing school desegregation under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There were about 10 years after the famous Supreme Court decision of Brown versus Board of Education that established the right of children to attend integrated schools and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And during those 10 years, my father, well, in those 10 years, you had only the federal courts to attempt to desegregate the public schools in the South and throughout the country. And my father spent much of those 10 years traveling around the South, interviewing and offering advice to school districts that were struggling with the implications of Brown versus Board of Education. And my father served as sort of an informal advance man for the Justice Department, the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. And he would send back these memos saying that in one case, in one county, there was one guy who ran a place, but that he understood the tide of history, and that if you could have Burke Marshall or Robert Kennedy or whoever was running the Justice Department at the time, give him a call, then everything would be okay. But that in another county, it was a lost cause, and he just planned on bringing in the troops and filing suit. So it was actually reading my father's papers after he passed away that I first started thinking about stepping away from my career in science and spending part of my life in service to my fellow man. And it was as a result of my father's work when the Civil Rights Act passed that he had become somewhat of an expert on the nuts and bolts of school desegregation and was called upon to write what were referred to as the federal guidelines for implementing Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. These were the detailed rules that called out what Southern school systems had to do each year to desegregate their school systems to qualify for federal funds. And with the carrot of federal education funding and the stick provided by the federal guidelines for Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, more school desegregation was achieved in the year following the Civil Rights Act than had been achieved in the 10 years preceding. My father had the chance to work with some of the leaders of the Civil Rights Movement. He knew Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy, and others. He described having dinner at the kitchen table of Merle and Edgar Evers and holding their infant young child in his hands only weeks before Edgar was shot down in his driveway. So my dad was not an activist. He never took place in he never took part in all of these, the protests and marches and so on. They're an important part of the movement. But he saw a great injustice, and he quietly devoted himself to changing it. And as a society, we need to continue to remedy these injustices. For his stirring words on the pulpits and churches and the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, to the quiet dignity that defined the non-violent protest that he led, Martin Luther King Jr. led our country down a path towards justice. But as the events of the last year have shown, the journey on that path to justice is far from complete. The struggle for justice and equality continues. Martin Luther King famously said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But the arc does not bend on its own. On July 2nd, 1964, when President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law, the arc was bent toward justice, only because of the tireless efforts of so many who fought so long in that right direction. And we must continue those efforts. We must continue to bend the arc of justice so that we as a country never break. Thank you all, and thank you for being here tonight.
Good evening. My name is Gerald Butters, and I'm a professor of history here at Aurora University. It's my honor to introduce to you our featured speaker this evening, Illinois State Senator Kwame Raoul. Senator Raoul is widely recognized for his work on behalf of residents of the 13th Legislative District and people across Illinois. He's a champion for justice, a supporter of job creation, a leader of pension reform, and an advocate for minority and women-owned businesses. In addition to his work in the State House, Senator Raoul is a partner with the law firm Quarles & Brady. He's focused primarily on cases involving the rights of victims of crime and the rights of low-income individuals. He's a member of the Board of International Child Care, a role that led him to Haiti after the 2010 earthquake to deliver medical supplies. He is a tireless legislator and a true humanitarian. Please welcome State Senator Kwame Raoul.
Good evening. Thank you for that introduction. Introductions always make you feel better about yourself than when you first walked in the room. However, I'm a little disappointed. I didn't expect to follow Congressman Foster and the words that he delivered today, so you put a little bit of pressure on me, and I'll never forgive you for that. Mayor, it's good to see you, and I get to see your mayor in Springfield advocating not only for the city of Aurora, but for municipalities throughout the state that face difficult fiscal challenges. And your mayor is not just a leader for your city, but for municipalities throughout the state. My colleague in the Senate, Jim Oberweis, we were just talking off to the side about how I'm coming into his area now, because I've seen him a lot in my area on the south side of Chicago. And it's a good thing. In all seriousness, it's a good thing, because oftentimes folks only go into, when they're campaigning or whatever, only go into places where they're most comfortable or where they think they would be the best welcome. But I have to credit Jim, Senator Oberweis, for going and seeing for himself and engaging, and really engaging and finding out about the challenges that are faced on the south and west side of Chicago, as they are faced in other parts of the state as well. And I want to thank him for doing that, because it takes doing that to fully understand the challenges we continue to face. Representative Linda Chapadilla, she is a woman who challenges us all in Springfield. Certainly never lets us go to sleep, and doesn't shy away from controversy. But that's the type of leadership that is needed to confront some of the challenges that we have, and that you all know we have in the state of Illinois. And Ted, thank you so much for having me here, and to the professors and the students and the faculty and administration. This is quite some university you have here, and Ted took me to the STEM school, and I really appreciate, I've been having conversations with higher education institutions in the city of Chicago about how they can do more than educate the students at the school, but engage in the community that surrounds them, and Aurora University is certainly doing that, and I applaud you for that, and I want to steal some of your ideas instead of taking it in other parts of the state. Disclaimer, although many of you all may know that some 10 years ago, I replaced Barack Obama in the state legislature. Just in case you didn't notice that, I look differently than he does. He's got hair, I don't. He's a bit taller than me. He's got bigger ears than I do. And certainly he's a better speaker than I am. So if anybody is expecting a riveting Barack Obama speech, you might as well leave right now. Notwithstanding that, I'm deeply honored for the invitation to speak tonight. While I don't take lightly this occasion or the opportunity to talk to you and the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, I've noticed that the farther we've come from the death of revered figures in our nation's history, the easier it is to honor them with our words, and the harder it is to do justice to them with our actions. I'll get back to that in a few minutes, but for now, I dare to ask you to just relax a little bit and loosen up and get less stiff and formal as we sometimes do at these events. And to detain the thought for a moment that we don't have to observe Dr. King's birthday in formal reverence, reminding ourselves of our own inadequacy compared to those of heroes of the civil rights era, but that we might have a job to do ourselves, and that we might actually measure up to the task. Not only might we measure up, but we must. But first, let me share with you a few words of Dr. Martin Luther King that he said that you may not have heard before. In 1967 in New York City, far from the slowly desegregating schools and lunch counters of the South, he proclaimed, "A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth." 4 days before his death at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., Dr. King said, "Ultimately, a great nation is a compassionate nation. America has not met its obligation and its responsibilities to the poor. There is nothing new about poverty. What is new is that we now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty. The real question is whether we have the will." King called it the curse of poverty and said it was no justification in our age. Not in this age of 2015. Its hold on our society has not loosened. We could all name any number of social ills our communities are facing right now. Let's start with education. The youth of nearly every other developed nation boasts higher educational achievement than the United States. Year after year, we trot out the same stale fixes and engage in the same fruitless arguments. Is it charter schools versus neighborhood schools? Is it vouchers? Is it merit pay for teachers? Are the teachers to blame? Is it more tests? Is it fewer tests? Is it different tests? Meanwhile, the answer can be found in an unlikely place. Your local real estate broker's office. Any honest realtor will tell you that where home values are higher, schools tend to be better. So which came first? Did great schools attract well-off families? Eventually, yes. But first, wealth and sustained economic investment produce communities where most children are assured a good education and solid life prospects. Dr. King understood the power of education. In his place and time, the obstacle was a slow pace of desegregation. Schools that still kept students of different races separate and unequal, coupled with white flight to better resourced private schools. There are still too many cities where de facto desegregation in education persists today. But if Dr. King were here, I think he would also recognize that the question of a quality education cannot be divorced from the quality of the surrounding community. It's not just about teacher pay and the money that flows directly to the school from higher property tax. The unemployed parent and the parent who works 3 jobs at minimum wage just to pay for rent and often unable to create the kind of home environment young people need to support them in their education. They may have the will, but there simply is no way. Kids who start school behind tend to stay behind and fall farther behind. Teachers and administrators struggle to help them simply meet expectations on our standardized tests here at home, when the real test is whether they can compete for jobs in the global economy. Well, it doesn't stop with education. Let's talk about criminal justice. I had the pleasure several years ago of leading an effort to abolish the death penalty in Illinois. In addition to the alarming number of innocent men in Illinois sent to death row, we were second only to the state of Florida. One of the strongest arguments for abolition was the disparate application of the death penalty when the accused was African American. Recent events have put the spotlight on the treatment of African American males by law enforcement, revealing sickening instances of excessive use of force against unarmed individuals, but also racial disparities in traffic stops, arrests, searches, incarceration, and more. Many have taken to social media and to the streets, if you haven't noticed, to protest a system that far too often still judges our children by the color of their skin and not by the content of their character. Oprah Winfrey took a lot of heat recently when she challenged the protesters to go a little further, saying, "What I'm really looking for is some type of leadership to come out of this, to say, this is what we want." She was blasted for not respecting the movement and the sincere expressions of outrage and demands for change. But as I listened to her statements, I didn't see an inconsistency. We can affirm that it's healthy for folks of all races to take to the street in the spirit of our First Amendment to express their conviction that no one should be treated differently on the basis of race and that Black lives do matter. At the same time, Oprah offered a way forward, a way for activists and advocates to strategically leverage the movement to effect specific, sustainable change. That's because, like education, police misconduct, and racial disparities in law enforcement cannot be divorced from underinvestment in certain communities, particularly communities of color. These are neighborhoods that used to be alive, teeming with commercial and industrial activity and job opportunities. But now they're dead. The jobs are gone, the investment is gone, and the inevitable result is that hope too is often gone. More often than not, crime moves in to take its place. Where underinvestment is tolerated, higher crime rates and gang activity are tolerated. When gangs recruit youth more aggressively than sports leagues and after-school programs, you have a problem with underinvestment. And when the communities that suffer from chronic underinvestment tend to be predominantly African American and Latino, that only exacerbates racial profiling. They're connected. Let me be clear. I'm not at all creating an excuse for racial profiling. Nothing justifies racial profiling or the excessive use of force against suspects of a certain race or any type of racial prejudicial presumption. No amount of lost investment, no number of crumbling buildings, no crime rate can excuse the assumption that a person who looks a certain way and perhaps dresses in a certain manner has a greater propensity toward crime. But we must understand the conditions that allow these attitudes to fester. Half a century after the victories of the civil rights movement, we must understand that, as Dr. King did, the iron link between racism and poverty. You know, as a father of a 16-year-old African-American boy, I worry every time he walks out my door. I know that Dr. King, if he were raising his kids today, he would worry too. But he wouldn't just stage isolated protests against particular incidents. He wouldn't seek to separate the fear that parents like me feel for our children from the question of whether we are adequately investing in poor communities, which are disproportionately communities of color. Where there are expensive homes, there are good schools. There's little gang activity, and there are fewer parents living in fear that their sons or daughters will be the next victims of either racial profiling or crime. Now let's talk health care. President Obama pushed the Affordable Care Act in order to move America closer to the goal of universal access to health care as a right and not a privilege. You know, understand that as a son of a community physician who came from the poorest town in the poorest country, one of the poorest towns in the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, Asia. A man who made house calls with a pistol in his black bag and refused to turn back patients because of their inability to pay. I'm in no way knocking Obamacare. The Affordable Care Act has helped 800,000 people in Illinois alone enroll in health care insurance plans or the state's expanded Medicaid program. Many of these individuals are now able to access routine and preventative care, when previously they might have avoided seeking medical attention until their symptoms took them to the emergency room. Still, there's no denying the reality that when you go into one of these neighborhoods I've been talking about, where we chronically underinvested in education and jobs and infrastructure. You won't find enough doctors, clinics, hospitals to serve the people who live there. You'll find a community mental health system that has been decimated, if it exists at all. You'll find far more residents in need of substance abuse treatment than there are spots in rehabilitation programs. Where hospitals and clinics are shutting down or cutting back on services, of course you're going to find unhealthy kids who have trouble learning. You're also going to find people who are more likely to commit crimes because they aren't getting mental health treatment that they need. You're going to find gangs making money off of the addictions of those without access to substance abuse treatment. And more often than not, you'll find a disproportionate number of young African American males involved in the criminal justice system, which in turn leaves young people with fewer role models, less stable home environments, and fewer reasons to hope their lives will turn out any differently. This is the new civil rights agenda. It doesn't lend itself to the glib slogan or hashtag, and no single piece of legislation will bring us victory. It's the opposite of a food chain. It's a starvation chain. Starved of investment, jobs, opportunities, justice, care, and finally hope. Communities of color that are also communities of poverty languish in a tangled web of cause and effect that Dr. King would immediately recognize. Let me attempt to cut through that tangled web and be clear about what I've been trying to talk about this evening. Money. To decode the difference between good schools and bad, high crime and safe streets, sickness and health, plentiful opportunities and hopelessness, we need just follow the money. A lot of well-intentioned people will tell you not to focus on money, students. Often they're your teachers who want you to love learning for its own sake. I agree with that part. But tonight, I'm going to tell you to focus on money. Now let me be clear, I'm not, students, not for the bling, not for the purchasing power, but because if you don't, you'll end up working for money when money could be working for you. That's not just good advice for handling your personal finances. It's true on the political level as well. Soon after my appointment to the Senate, I ran into then Senate President Emil Jones in the bathroom. As Senator Oberweis knows, many conversations can take place in the men's room. Solving a lot of problems in the men's room. But to be fair, in the women's bathroom as well. I've just never been in there. Then President Jones and I had an interesting conversation, and I was brand new. Literally, I believe my second day. He told me that most minority legislators tend to seek out committees dealing with social issues, public health, human services, education. He said, but it's important to look beyond those issues, not ignore them. He said, because too often, the suggestions that come out are simply Band-Aids on our larger problem. If you want to make impact, he said, follow the money. look at economic opportunity and the hard realities that create and destroy it. So as a freshman legislator, I asked to be on the Senate Pensions and Investment Committee. He said, in his raspy voice, he says, "Do you have any experience in finance?" No, I said, but I'm a lawyer, and I can learn anything. He made me vice chair, and later I became the chair of that committee. I started holding hearings on the participation of minority-owned and women-owned financial service firms in the state retirement systems and state investment opportunities. Illinois is now recognized nationally for our work to make sure that minority and women-owned firms, investment firms, have a fair chance to compete for asset allocation from our public pension funds and other state investments. That's an example of the way we create tangible opportunities for Illinoisans, traditionally at a disadvantage in our economy. One of the firms that benefited from the establishment of an even playing field was Aurora Investments, with an African-American CEO named John Rogers. As Aurora Investments grew, so did their giving back to the community. Initially with the mentoring educational initiative, which has since grown to a pre-K through 8 school on the south side of Chicago named Raoul Academy. At Raoul Academy, they begin to teach kids about the markets in the first grade. That's why Emil Jones' advice to me as a minority legislator was so clairvoyant. Follow the money. Tackle the complex structural economic problems facing our communities. As Dr. King put it, true compassion is more than flinging a coin at a beggar. It comes to see the edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. The edifice produces more than beggars. It's the source of the extreme frustration felt by so many Americans when a wealthy presidential candidate was caught on camera telling a room full of similarly situated people that 47% of Americans are dependent on government and that they're takers, and that they don't contribute to society. It's a source of frustration and cynicism many Americans feel when our political systems allow candidates utilize independent wealth and self-fund and rise to the highest levels of government while most people don't believe they have the means or influence to even make their voices heard by voting, let alone running for office. The Supreme Court has added more than a few bricks to that edifice in recent years, forcing on us the fiction that money is speech and corporations are people. Follow the money. Unfortunately, it'll tell you a lot about the kind of representation of governments we're getting. Last year, the numbers showed our economy recovering. But with 95% of gains since the recession going to the wealthiest 1% of Americans. The widening wealth gap doesn't just keep the poor in poverty anymore. It's threatening to eliminate the middle class. Those who are invested in the status quo tell us it's all about hard work. But we know that's a red herring. The 47% who became a rallying cry in 2012 included not just the unemployed or underemployed receiving welfare benefits, but the working poor and disintegrating middle class. Many of these folks are working 2 or 3 jobs, juggling transportation, housing, childcare, navigating system after system that penalizes them for their poverty. with consumption taxes, aggressive consumption taxes, with fines for this and fees for that. It costs a lot of money to be poor in America. Even those who work full-time are being attacked as greedy simply for wanting a secure retirement so that they can grow in dignity. The Illinois legislature just passed a law that creates a program called Secure Choice. If you're an employer that has 25 or more employees and you don't have retirement benefits through your workplace, you'll be automatically enrolled in your own Roth IRA savings account once Secure Choice is up and running. You can make choices about how much you contribute and how your money is invested. And your money is yours even if you change jobs. It's not your boss's, and it's not the government's. That's just one example of the concrete steps that we can take to start cutting through that web of poverty and underinvestment. But there's so much more. You know, I talk to students. I thought about coming here and telling you, students, that you can be the next Dr. Martin Luther King. But I'd be lying. You can't be the next Barack Obama either. You can't even be the next me. As President Obama's successor in the state Senate seat, I've heard the phrase, "You've got big shoes to fill," more times than I can count. I just laugh and I say, I care too much about Barack to let him walk around Washington, D.C. barefooted. So I'll let him keep his shoes, and I'll keep wearing the same shoes that got me to the table in the first place. No, you can't be the next anyone else but yourself. Strive to be the best you that you can be. But although you will put your own unique stamp on the world, there's much we can learn from a comprehensive look at Dr. King's life. We all know he was a great leader. But in recent years, we learn more about his flaws and his failings. The new film Selma, which by the way Oprah Winfrey produced, depicts Dr. King in moments of strength and triumph, but also in moments of self-doubt, discouragement, hesitation, and coming to face with his own moral missteps. Like Dr. King, every one of us will be challenged by our own imperfections. To be perfectly blunt, students, you will fail. And you will probably fail repeatedly. I know I have. I ran for office 3 times unsuccessfully. I'm a 3-time loser. But no one can succeed without failing. And that's no coincidence, because each failure teaches us valuable lessons we otherwise miss. The key is to be prepared for failure, while also being prepared for opportunity. That's a personal lesson. But I also can't help thinking, what if everyone had a smartphone and a social media account in the 1960s? We probably would have known a lot more about Dr. King's challenges and his imperfections. Perhaps that knowledge might even have compromised his ability to lead us into a more just and compassionate society. So we need to be careful about the standards to which we hold our leaders. We should be aware that our zeal to dig up dirt, launch personal attacks, and deconstruct every move made by those in public service and their families. When we do that, we risk creating a climate in which few people of goodwill dare to lead or lend themselves to service. I was reminded of this as I watched people rallying in Paris. My heart is with them because I believe the freedoms of political speech, in the freedoms of political speech and artistic expression, I believe those are essential. But to scrutinize, mock, and tear down without also building up is an empty act. Our democratic form of government demands of citizens a certain maturity and responsibility. This was the responsibility that Dr. King and those who marched with him took upon themselves as they went out unarmed to face beatings, imprisonment, and even death. As Theodore Roosevelt said, it's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, who, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. The legacy of Dr. King unequivocally calls us out of our critical echo chambers and into that arena. You know, in high school, I was a decent basketball player. But most kids on my basketball team in the spring, after basketball season, played baseball. And I sucked at baseball. So my junior year, I went out for the track team. At one meet, my coach put me in the mile relay. I was running the third leg, and we were a bit behind, quite a bit behind. So I took off in a mad sprint as if I were running a 40-yard dash. I felt the burden of needing to close the gap for my team by myself. And as a result, I didn't pace myself well. As I rounded the third turn, it was a windy day. I turned right into the wind. I felt like I walked into a wall. I barely dragged myself to the spot where I could hand the baton off to my teammate. I take that experience with me in public service. Students, you are the leaders to whom I must pass the baton that I carry. It's ill-advised for any one of my generation to think we can keep running the race at full speed without preparing to pass the baton to the next generation, to complete the next lap. As I reflect upon Martin Luther King Jr., his legacy, and what he would think of our society today, I think he perceived that we've fallen short of equipping new leaders to take on the web of interconnected injustices that still entraps our communities and our people. So, for my own part, I hope to hand off that baton smoothly, without slackening my steady pace. And you students, I hope you are willingly reaching back to receive that baton. I thank you all for bearing with me and allowing me to speak today. I'd love to give an opportunity for students or anybody to ask questions.
understand, is it more of what has happened in the past, or is it, you feel that there's technology today that, can guarantee the guilt of certain people that might...
It's a good question. It's a good question. And we entertained that suggestion during the debates, not only of the death penalty. There was a time where some came forth with the notion of creating a new standard in criminal justice called a no doubt standard as opposed to a reasonable doubt standard. And the thing that we have to appreciate as legislators and as people at large is that we're imperfect. We're human beings. And even with technology, and I don't know sciences like Congressman Foster, I barely survived my physics classes. But even with technology, even with videotape interrogation, let me tell you, we had 3 different counties: Will County, Cook County, Lake County. We had 3 different individuals who implicated themselves on videotape to crimes that they did not commit. People point to DNA. DNA evidence is not relevant in all murder cases. We have to accept that we're imperfect. And I challenge you to think and put yourself in, as I said during my closing during the death penalty debate, put yourself in the position of that person that's charged with injecting that serum to suck the life out of somebody without knowing for certain whether whoever presided over that trial, whoever investigated, got it right. Would you take on that responsibility? And people pointed out the heinousness of crimes. Crimes are so heinous that the perpetrator of the crime certainly deserves to die. Guess what? The underlying crimes in the cases that we got wrong, many of the cases that we got wrong, they were heinous crimes, but we had the wrong person. So the heinousness of the crime by itself doesn't merit ignoring that we're human beings. Students, I know you got it.
I have a question. Passing on the baton, as a student, what can I do to ensure myself to receive the baton safely? What's the 3 steps that I can take?
I don't know if I'll identify exactly 3, but 1 for the class. and go to class prepared, not only ready for your professors to challenge you, but ready to challenge your professors. You know, I started out studying as an undergraduate engineering major at Illinois Institute of Technology. And you know, in the sciences, you know, as you study them, there's usually a right answer, and your professors teach you a specific way to get there. And it didn't allow enough flexibility for debate for me, and so I ended up transferring, and eventually I studied political science because we argued in those classes. and so have the ability to not only challenge your professors as you learn from them, have the ability to challenge people like me, to ask questions, not just the comfortable ones, but the uncomfortable ones. And then I'd like to reiterate part of the message that I tried to touch upon in my remarks. I'd like to challenge you to learn about money. Again, learn about money in a way that, you know, as you take your degree out to be employed in whatever field of human endeavor you may seek out, you're not just working for money, but you learn how to have your money work for you. Learn how to allow it to give you the independence where you can take on some of the social ills that we face. And at that point, you can comfortably take on that baton.
Speaking of money, do you have some hope that Illinois can pull itself out of being the worst economic state in the union? In your lifetime?
I do, otherwise I quit my job. You know, I don't do this because this is a high-paying job. I do this for the service end of it. And let's be clear. I mean, let's be clear about the state of affairs and how we got here. Some people want to characterize, they want to point to an individual or to a party of responsibility. I mean, first, I always like to start by pointing inwards and taking responsibility. So I'm responsible, and the Democratic Party is responsible, but so is the Republican Party. So, and it's not just, it used to be, well, the safest thing was to either point the finger at Governor Blagojevich, because, you know, he's a convicted governor, or Governor Ryan, because he's a convicted governor. It's not that easy. These are problems decades in the making. As you look at our pension challenges, they were having these debates, and they were having these pension committees at the top of the 20th century. These were not new problems. At the time of our Constitutional Convention, the pension funds were about 40% funded. These are problems that have been in the making over time. Structural deficits that have been ignored over time. And so, whether we're on solid footing by the time I decide to walk away, I don't know, but I'm gonna do what I can to move the ball forward, because it didn't start when I came in. And so, like anything that was created over time, it's gonna take effort over time to do it. It's gonna take bipartisan effort.
Senator Raoul, how are you today?
Good.
Similar question. I had the exact same question, but I'd like a little more specifics. Do you, being in your position with the Finance and Pension Committee, have you identified changes that need to be made or things that we need to work on?
Well, you know, I was the chairman of the conference committee on pension reform, and it was a bipartisan committee, and we came to bipartisan agreement on the resolution. Now, our Constitution challenges us because there's a provision, a pension protection clause in our provision, and so the measure that we did pass to dig us out of our problem, to help dig us out of our problem, has been challenged in the courts and is pending before our Supreme Court right now. And so we hope to hear from them in the coming months. If it's stricken down, it's hopefully in what they call dicta, they will give us some guidance of what we can do. There are some who say, well, you know that the Supreme Court is going to strike down what you did, so you ought to come up with something right now. Well, even if there's reason to predict that they may in fact strike it down, it's important to wait for the guidance that they may give us in that decision, because you may start on a pathway that, you know, you discover you can't do based on what they say in the decision. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Raoul, for being with us tonight and challenging us and allowing us to take a time out to pause and reflect on both Dr. King's legacy and our future together as a community. On behalf of all of us, thank you for your thoughtful comments, Congressman and Mayor Leiter also. So thank you all for being with us. Look forward to seeing you in a few weeks for our next Arts and Ideas speaker when Daniel Pink joins us. So have a good evening. Look forward to seeing you in a few weeks. Thank you.